Good morning. Welcome to the Adaptive Workshop. We are going to be going through certification preparation today. Um, this will be the first of our sessions together. I will be with you today and tomorrow. My name is Peter Johnson. You will be with Laura McCoy the next weekend, which will be Saturday, Sunday, and then with LN. Different people have different subscriptions, different parts of this program, and you'll be entitled to different things. But so far, we will all be together. These sessions will be recorded. They are recorded so that you will have the opportunity to go back and review if necessary. You'll also, in case you've missed some part of a session, be able to hear that session as well. So that's just one of the services that are provided. When we are recording, I ask everyone to please just go off mute anytime, ask a question, make a comment. We will entertain as much interaction as we possibly can. That's what makes this much more interesting, as well as makes sure that everyone has all the information that you need. However, when we don't want to speak, just go back onto mute. If you'd like to cite any particular instances, things from perhaps your work environment, just keep in mind that we don't want to say anything that would be proprietary to an organization. Okay. So based on your plan, as I mentioned, you will have access to different parts of the Succeed platform, the recordings being one. Any questions or issues or concerns or changes to the plan you'd like to enroll in, then please contact Adaptive directly. I'm not in a position as the webinar instructor to be able to help you do that, right? So go back and confirm all of that with Adaptive. This program, as you will notice, is somewhat unique and very successful. Unique in that the approach is what many people would consider inside out. We like to start with an introduction of techniques and understand how techniques can be applied to different aspects of doing business analysis work. And if you can visualize or feel doing the work through the technique, it makes it easier then to understand the actual nature of that work as we go through the business analysis body of knowledge. So we're going to be talking about techniques as an introduction to each chapter, and then we will get into each chapter. This particular session is just the start, a way to understand the chapter. We'll talk more about the whole program a little bit further on. But the success of the program has been remarkable, and I don't want to underemphasize that because this should give you a great launching point, a great point of confidence, a great way to feel that you are not only understanding the business analysis body of knowledge from the point of view of being able to pass an exam, but that you understand the business analysis body of knowledge from the point of view of being able to do the work. That this puts you in a position to be a better practitioner. So that the position that Adaptive has taken in the world in terms of training organizations and the number of people who have gone through and the number of people who continue to enroll in these programs is just increasing. So it's been a great pleasure as far as I've been introduced to this program and being able to lead it, to be able to help you do that. Let's begin by talking about some of the key terms that we'll look forward to in business analysis. And there's no better term to start with than business analysis itself. If we happen to have school-age children and it's time to bring your parents to school and explain what mom or dad does, and someone asks you, what do you do as a business analyst? You might find it difficult to explain at times, but the essence of it is in that introduction to the BABOK. Let's go over it. This is almost word for word from the introductory chapter. That business analysis is the practice of bringing about change. Just stop right there. We are change agents. We enable change. Think about that. What does it take to enable change? Well, we start by understanding perhaps what are the different needs. There's no better way to enable change than to know what's the problem you're trying to solve, or what is the opportunity that you are attempting to introduce, right? So if we understand those needs, that's a good way to begin with change, right? But understanding the needs isn't the end of the task there. What else do we do? Understanding those needs, we now help come up with solutions. And it's not that the business analyst develops all the solutions, but helps perhaps the organization develop solutions. Right? So remember, we are enablers of change. So we help identify different solutions that are out there, because there are many different ways to solve a problem. Right? But we are looking in particular for those solutions that deliver value. Some solutions will do a better job addressing the needs than other solutions. And of course, who defines what value is? Who is the ultimate arbiter of what's providing value? It's the stakeholder. I'm going to define that term in a second. But the stakeholder, who has an interest in seeing that this change happens, right? That's a stakeholder. These are key words, right? Think about them. Change, needs, solutions, value, stakeholders. Right? These are the basic concepts that are underlying of business analysis. And you could add one more, context, and you come up with something in the BABA called the Business Analysis Core Concept Model. Excuse me. Since we addressed change as being one of those key concepts, let's talk about change. Not all change is the same. There are some things that are simply operational, where we are used to doing it this way, and now we're going to change a process or change a procedure or change a component, and that's an operational change. Now, operational changes are perhaps less dramatic when it comes to a whole organization, but nonetheless just as important. And there's some operational changes which may have not been apparent up until the time that we did a little business analysis and understood that by making this change we could seek a certain kind of improvement or solve a certain kind of problem. Right? So don't neglect operational change. Another kind of change is what we call tactical change, where it's not just the procedure that becomes different, but perhaps by providing a different source of materials or information, or by adopting a different way of accomplishing something, that we change our tactics, how we're going to go about doing the work that we do, beyond just procedural. And if it's something of a much broader scope, where it's not just a tactic, but we're going to change our strategy, that means that we're going to develop perhaps a different way of addressing a market, or we're going to develop a different kind of technology that will help us achieve a different goal, right? So we're looking at the overall strategy for accomplishing business objectives. Each of these gives us a challenge as a business analyst, right? Or as someone working within a business analysis team. You might be able to think of some examples of things that you might have done or others have done in your organization that showed the difference between what was a strategic change for an organization versus a tactical change versus an operational change. All right, so let's go back to what is business analysis. We said it was a practice of enabling change, right? How do we go about doing that? More often, we think about doing change in the context of a project. If we could define project, something that usually has a beginning and an end, where you have several people brought together to accomplish a certain goal, and therefore it's a project. We manage a project in that way, right? Business analysis can be done, is often done within the context of doing a project. Business analysis, however, can also be done before the project starts, after the project is finished. So even before we have defined what it is we want to do and who's going to work on something, business analysis, to a degree, helps understand what the current situation is and whether there's a need there or not, whether there's an opportunity there or not, whether it is justified or not. Right? So business analysis can exist before the project begins, can even be the incentive for doing a project. And even after the project team has then gone home, business analysis continues to understand, how do things work? What's the performance level? Are we meeting the goals that we set out? Is there something else we need to tweak in order to get more value out of that change that we just introduced? Is it still adequate? Those types of things. So we look at business analysis as a continuum, not just something within the confines of a project itself. That's what this means about business analysis can be formed within the project or across the enterprise. Okay. And like I said, a lot of business analysis is involved with just understanding what is going on now. That's what we call the current state. Or what are the desired outcomes? That's what we call the future state. Right? Not necessarily the future solution that will evolve, but what do we want to have as results? And is there any difference between what we're capable of doing now and what we would like to be doing in the future? Right? Those are all the things that are involved in business analysis. And ultimately, if we have a solution to introduce, what's involved in that particular transition? How do we get from where we are to where we want to be? Right? So that's the larger context for business analysis. And this is important to understand. Business analysis is not just recording what we call requirements, right? It's not just a stenographer role. It's not just identifying things that are going to have a particular requirement in terms of what we're trying to do, right? But we're dealing with what we call business analysis information. It's a broader scope than just the requirements. The requirements are a large part of that information, but not all of that information. So there's a lot of information that we work with that may or may not evolve to requirements. Right? So some of the planning that we do, some of the things that we do as interim work products or modeling or other things, might lead to requirements. Things about what we're doing, what we call the metadata, data about requirements. That's other kinds of information, right? So keep in mind that there is a lot more information involved in business analysis than just requirements themselves. That's depicted here in this Venn diagram, where if the blue represented all of business analysis information, you can see that there are certain things that may survive, may not survive. Some things may evolve into requirements. Requirements can be created. Requirements can go away. Right? So something may not be a current requirement, but is held off into the future as some other thing for consideration. This is all part of business analysis information. Keep this in mind as we go through all of the different knowledge areas involved in business analysis. Since we mentioned requirement, let's define that. This is the literal translation, again, out of the business analysis body of knowledge, that a requirement is a usable representation of a need. Right? Let that sink in for a little bit. A usable representation of a need. Remember that a need is not just a problem. A need can be an opportunity. So a problem is something that might exist in a current environment. An opportunity is something that does not yet exist, that we can perhaps implement. So any way that we can represent that need is a requirement. Right? So what's significant in that is that we are not yet saying how we're going to meet that need. Right? We're just representing the need itself. Unfortunately, in a lot of our practice environments, we have a document that we often call a business requirements document, which is not necessarily or literally requirements, right? So the business requirements document could include some of the background, the overall need identification. There are other things in that BRD that are not just strictly requirements, right? We also have other types of documents that we might work on, something that either you call literally a systems requirement specification, or maybe you have a different name for it, which becomes more of the systems analysis results, of the really detailed things that we're going to do in order to achieve a solution, right? Again, that's not just requirements, right? It may include requirements. So we want to separate this idea of requirements from another term we're going to use, the design. So where the requirement is a representation of need, a design is a usable representation of a solution. Right? So here is where we can actually specify how we're going to go about implementing or addressing that need, how we're going to satisfy it. Right? And so the different solutions can offer different value to an organization, to a stakeholder. Right? There's something to be realized with this solution. Right? And so we're going to now address the different design options, the different design capabilities, and how one design might compare to another design. Right? This is very much within the scope of business analysis work. It does not mean that the BA is necessarily the designer. Right? We are not necessarily the developer, the programmer, the architect, right? But we work with a lot of those different resources in terms of helping to understand different design opportunities, different design alternatives. So we've defined the two words here that are important here, the requirement as different from the design. Another word that we've encountered, we said that business analysis can exist across an enterprise. Let's talk about what is an enterprise, right? And let's take, again, the literal definition out of the BABAC, right? Where an enterprise is a system of one or more organizations. So these are where different organizations work together in some way, right? And the solutions that these organizations use in order to pursue a shared set of common goals. And what that means is that the enterprise is not just the overall largest corporate whatever structure of an organization. It doesn't necessarily mean all of the organizations, all of the different things that are done, but some system, it could represent a few organizations to achieve a particular common goal, right? That becomes an enterprise, right? So think of enterprise with a lowercase e, as being some area, multiple organizations that work together, that use a solution to achieve some type of a common goal. That's an enterprise. Business analysis works across the enterprise, not just within one organization per se, but how that organization interfaces with other organizations, the kind of work that gets passed among different work groups. Perhaps there are different solutions, IT solutions or other types of solutions involved. That becomes part of what used to be called enterprise analysis. Now it's called strategy analysis. We're going back and we keep refining some of the terms I've already used and elaborating on those. So we've talked about how a business is organized. Let's think about architecture for a minute. The word architecture itself implies some way of defining a framework or a structure, right? Not necessarily a physical structure. We have business architecture, how the business might be organized, right? And there are different businesses that are organized in different ways. They have different business architectures, right? Some are very centrally organized with common functions all at some headquarters level, staff level, and then going down to different work units. Other organizations might be organized by product line or by geographic area where they have markets, or nonprofits can be organized differently than profit-structured organizations. So all of this goes into the business architecture. Within any enterprise, we have an organization or more organizations, not just one, right? An organization can be at different levels, right? Where an organization now represents what we call an autonomous group, right, of people. So an organization could be something like the marketing organization, right? Or whatever product or service we're talking about, or a distribution, a warehouse function, something of that nature, right? Any of those could be in an organization. Remember that organizations working together as a system create what we call an enterprise. We're down at the organization level. Usually an organization has a person at the head of that organization, usually under one person as a lead. Not always. There are a lot of different management structures today. Usually it's a reporting type relationship, but again, not necessarily. There are a lot of different ways of developing working relationships today. But in general, an organization is centered around one particular goal or task or objective within the overall enterprise. When we talked about enabling change, we didn't mention these words, but let's differentiate between what becomes a plan and then what actually does that change, right? So a plan is just the proposal. It's how we intend to do something. It's a way of achieving a goal, right? It's not yet implemented, right? It's a way forward. There are lots of different plans that we work with in terms of business analysis. We do a lot of plans around business analysis, and that's going to be the first knowledge area that we're going to talk about, where we plan business analysis activity. But there are other plans that the business has that we need to understand, right? There are other plans for doing a project that other pieces of this project team will deal with, right? So there are a lot of different examples of plans throughout our work. I wanted to highlight a diagram that's in the business analysis body of knowledge, where it shows that not all requirements are the same. We have different classifications for requirements, right? And this idea of doing classifications is not to say that something is necessarily strictly in one versus another, but to help us understand what kinds of requirements we might be talking about at any particular time, right? So let's do each of these. There's a type of requirement we call a business requirement. Remember that BRD, that business requirement document, didn't differentiate. It just had all kinds of requirements in it. The business requirement is usually what the business wants to do in business terms. It's a higher level understanding of requirements. Higher in terms of motivation, not necessarily hierarchical, right? A lot of times we work on projects, we work on requirements, and we either don't understand or there are a lot of different opinions about what the actual business requirement is. That could be a problem. I'm sure that you can think of an example of that. So keep in mind that a business requirement is something that the business wants to accomplish in business terms. Now, who carries out different aspects of meeting business needs? Well, we call those stakeholders, right? So stakeholders within a larger business requirement have their own particular needs from a stakeholder perspective. So within a larger business requirement, say to expand into a new product or service, right? You have marketing interests, you have operational interests, maybe manufacturing interests, all kinds of supply chain interests, right? Each of these represent different stakeholders. Each of these may have their own requirements. And by the way, not all of those requirements are consistent. Right? There might be some contradictions, some issues, different senses of priority, certainly. And that's one of the challenges that we face in doing business analysis, is we understand within the business requirement what all of the different stakeholder requirements are. It's a challenge, again, that we face in terms of identifying all of the stakeholders, right? And then being able to evaluate how those different requirements might relate to each other. Right? So those are stakeholder requirements. Now, normally, understanding the stakeholder requirements in stakeholder terms, is still not sufficient for us to actually develop some kind of a solution. All right, so for that, we go down to the next classification we call solution requirements. And we break solution requirements down even further into two subcategories. One is functional requirements, the things that we expect a system to be able to manage, as an example, right? And non-functional requirements, which are the kinds of qualities or service expectations we have in working with a particular functional requirement. So those are solution requirements. It's the solution requirements that usually get implemented within a project team. That's usually one of the key deliverables that we come up with as a business analyst, is as we understand the business requirements and the stakeholder requirements, to now refine those into what are the solution requirements. Right? What do we expect a solution to do? There's one other classification that's important for us to understand, and those are the transition requirements. What does it take for us to get from whatever the current solution is to whatever the future solution is going to be? Right? So there might be things like training, that once we accomplish that requirement, that's done and that's satisfied, and now the solution can go into production. So that's one thing that makes transition requirements different from all the other requirements, because the business requirement survives before and after a project. It's still there. It's still a business requirement, just like the stakeholder requirements, just like the solution requirements. They're still there even after we launch a project, right? After some new system or a change to a system has been introduced, the solution requirement still survives. The transition requirement, however, will have been satisfied. If you can think of any examples of where you've replaced perhaps a mainframe with some other type of technology, and that's in a lot of our memories. We might still be replacing things today, but when you go through that kind of a transition, you're doing something like a data conversion project as a part of a project. So that would be an example of a transition requirement, doing the data conversion from one system to another. All right? So keep these in mind, again, not because we are going to put them in different types of documents per se, but because when we're talking about requirements, we have to be talking about the same things, right? Are we talking about stakeholder requirements, or are we talking about solution requirements? Or have we correctly identified the business requirement? Or is there consistency? Does this solution requirement meet one or more stakeholder requirements? Is it aligned with the business requirements? That's how this discussion is important. To go over that just a little bit more, clarify it, a business requirement we can think of in terms of the goals of an organization, the objectives, the outcomes, the results that we're trying to achieve. And the business requirement is what we're going to say is solution agnostic. It doesn't prescribe that we have to have one solution or another solution. It just says, what are those desired outcomes? Where are we going? Right? What's the direction that we want to head in? Why are we doing something? Right? What's the motivation for making a change at all? Those are the business